A lot of projects will even dual publish containers to multiple places. And it's good to do that because registries sometimes go down. And depending on what you're pushing out there, like that could be a runtime dependency. It may or may not be, depending on kind of the nature of how people run your containers. But being robust to that and being able to actually understand usage across those registries and being able to switch when you need to is something that ultimately just gives maintainers more control and more ownership of their software.
Hello and welcome to Committing to Cloud Native, the podcast where we talk about the confluence of open source and cloud native technology. Super excited to have a guest on today. Justin Dorfman and I, Justin is the other panelist, have already talked to Avi Press before on another podcast called Sustain about his amazing company. Avi is the co-founder and CEO of Scarf, spelled like scarfing something down or like the fancy neckwear, which he is unfortunately not wearing today in his Oakland apartment. Avi, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing great. Could you give us like a 2-minute pitch for what Scarf is and how it works?
Yeah. So Scarf is a company that's all about trying to help open source developers and projects get better understanding of how their software is being used and to connect with their commercial users. We're all about trying to help open source developers support themselves and helping businesses leverage their open source dependencies as effectively as possible and just connecting the two sides of that.
What does this have to do with cloud native?
The initial product that we are working really hard on right now is a very cloud native focused technology where we try to help specifically anyone that distributes Docker containers understand how are your Docker containers getting pulled? How are they being used? Which companies are using them? And this is something that, the open source supply chain right now, I think is a very hot topic with some of the recent vulnerabilities that have come up. And I think this is really highlighting the conversation that I think the cloud is really exacerbating. That's, we're pulling in dependencies from all over the place. And that leads to both security implications as well as just, data sharing problems and reliability problems in how we deliver software to each other. And so we're, kind of right in the heart of that right now by trying to help open source projects actually distribute those containers to their users directly and having more control over how they distribute those containers.
I know that Linkerd is using this new product. Can you kind of go into how they're using it and what they're doing?
Yeah. So they're users of the Scarf Gateway, Linkerd, and Buoyant, the company behind it. So all of their Docker containers, you fetch them through a Linkerd domain that they own. And that domain is connected to the Scarf Gateway. And so Linkerd uses Scarf really for two things. So one is that, the gateway is redirecting traffic to wherever those containers live. And now if in the future Linkerd wants to move their container registry from one place to another, they can do that. It's their domain that you're fetching from. And then all the stats associated is something that I think is kind of the original reason they wanted to get on board with it. And so even knowing like what versions, what tags of the container are actually getting pulled over time, where in the world are they coming and which companies and which clouds and container runtimes and all these sorts of things that your registry has that data, just they don't share it with you for a myriad of reasons. And we at Scarf think that maintainers should have that information. That's very helpful, both from, project maintenance to know, did people get the bug fix that we just pushed out, who's using it, but also to support the businesses behind these projects to know, here's the commercial users. I think one of the very common business models here is having an open source project and like say an enterprise grade cloud service that you try to upsell those users to, and having an understanding of which companies use the open source version is really helpful for your lead gen and for kind of just assessing project health. I think that we tend to heavily weight stars on GitHub in a lot of cases, but that's not really actually as important as, well, how many companies are using this in production?
I'm such a star person, because it's just such a vanity metric. However, if you look in your GitHub stats and you see clone per day, that's where I'm like, oh, holy moly, that's pretty cool. And so, yeah, stars are cool, but they don't really tell you that much. I think if I remember correctly, Oliver, the CTO, said it's the missing admin dashboard for container hosting. Is that something like how he said it? I thought it was like dead on.
Yeah. And I think because, a lot of projects will even, dual publish containers to multiple places. And it's good to do that because registries sometimes go down. And depending on what you're pushing out there, like that could be a runtime dependency. It may or may not be, depending on kind of the nature of how people run your containers. But being robust to that and being able to actually understand usage across those registries and being able to switch when you need to is something that ultimately just gives maintainers more control and more ownership of their software.
Is there a company or is it something that you do that tracks uptime of different container registries?
It's not something that we are actively tracking right now, but one of the things that we are working on with the gateway is basically detecting when the registry goes down and automatically failing over to one of our mirrors. The gateway largely just redirects to wherever the registry, but in some cases, certain container runtimes don't actually respect those redirects, and then we have to proxy. And when we proxy, we have our own pull-through caches that we use, and the idea is that if we detect the registry goes down, we can just fail over to that cache, which is kind of a neat way to have just, more robust, just another layer of redundancy.
Right.
And when we have the automatic mechanisms, we'll kind of just by default be tracking that kind of thing as well.
Well, can you go more into that? Like, what's your infrastructure? Like, if someone's going to switch to your service, what are you doing? What's your cloud stack, whatever?
Yeah, we've spent a lot of time on this infrastructure, and as we keep building out, it's getting ever more complex. So basically, if you use the Scarf Gateway, you just really sign up on our site. It's fully managed by Scarf, though we will be open sourcing the actual core things. You can run it yourself if you want. Our stack is a very robust thing. It's all on AWS and in multi-region, so it's it's kind of fast regardless of where you are in the world. And the idea is that if someone says Docker pull yourdomain.com/whatever your image identifier is, first it hits us, and then we look up in a redirect cache of, well, where is this container actually? And then by default, we just issue a redirect, and the client just follows that redirect and pulls the container, and we log that it happened, and then we can process all that data downstream and expose that to the project owners. There's a bit more complexity in terms of just making sure that stuff is always available. So we use Kubernetes very heavily to orchestrate, the actual app servers running. We have a global Redis cache that is keeping track of these things and all the backups to make sure that stuff never goes offline.
Have you ever considered multi-cloud?
It is something that we are considering for the long run. I think right now, especially at our size, multi-cloud is definitely challenging to do right now, both for just implementation complexity and also just cost. But it's definitely something that we aspire to do.
Speaking of cost, I think AWS literally billed you $482 for support for fixing your original monthly bill. Please go into that. I saw it on Twitter. That's how I know it.
Yeah, I mostly tweeted that. Yeah, I thought it was funny. They're resolving it. I think it's going to be okay. So I didn't really to really hard throw shade at AWS, but I thought it was funny because we've been moving towards this more global infrastructure for the gateway. At the end of the day, if this is where your container is hosted, it needs to be fast everywhere, available all the time and stuff. So we put a lot of investment into making sure that infrastructure is robust. And so we had a few resources that just didn't get, for whatever reason, didn't get cleaned up, and we're kind of just sitting around, and we just saw this huge AWS bill that was alarming, and we contacted them, and they took care of it, and it was fine. But then they left us with just another bill for the support to do that, which was kind of crazy. And I just tweeted kind of something tongue in cheek to make a joke about it, but in all seriousness, AWS has been great. And the infrastructure been building out is very rock solid as a result of kind of all the tooling they put out there. So props to AWS. They do a great job. I think they're easy to gang up on in some kind of these ways because they're just so successful, but for good reason.
There's a reason they're number one. It's because you can't get fired for choosing AWS.
Right. And I think the multi-cloud thing is definitely very interesting for us in the long run because you want to be as redundant as you can be. And so for us at this point in time, being multi-region was kind of the middle ground that gives us that redundancy and speed around the globe, but was not quite as complex to take on at our size because we're still a startup. So
totally.
If you're just a middle layer for interfacing with other large cloud providers that just gives more data to the users, why are the cloud providers working with you? Why doesn't AWS just block all of your ports, all of your requests?
Why don't they just block everything that we're doing? So I think there's a few things behind this. I mean, one is that if you are a cloud provider, say of a registry service, so AWS has their own public container registry products. Anyone using the Scarf Gateway, using their own domain to distribute their containers, is more easily able to switch between the providers. And so in that way, we're basically an element of letting projects and companies choose the best registry. So if you believe we have the best registry and we want to actually like make the case, well, you should switch to us because we offer the best product, gateway Scarf users are more easily able to switch. And I think that's a problem right now, because if you're on a hosting provider that introduces a new feature that makes their product worse, or, makes it more expensive, or in any way makes it so that, you would want to move, their incentive is to just lock you in. And the mechanism of that lock-in is that the URL is theirs and not yours. And everything about your hosting is at their discretion and not one that you have any control over. And so by being an agent of shifting some of that leverage back to the project owners, we are creating a space where the best registry should win, and not the registry that's just most established should continue to win. And so I think that's a really key thing that we provide. And having more of that data downstream, I mean, even though the registries have this information or holding on to it, we are also processing that and building tooling on top of it, which I think is valuable even if, to really anyone, and not something that those registries do now. Yeah, that's kind of the idea there.
You mentioned helping out with lead gen as well. This is something where NPM, for example, doesn't tell you all the people who download your package, but they know that stuff, and then they can use that internally to figure out what package is best and to best position themselves in the space. It's probably even better with large monopoly like companies like Google or Amazon, which have the ability and the developer teams to say, okay, this is better, so let's go there, or let's take over that project, et cetera, et cetera. NPM probably doesn't have that sort of clout yet, although they might in certain circumstances. Although I think NPM was bought Microsoft anyway. So yeah, sure. Yep. But one of the things which I'm curious about from your perspective is the lead gen aspect. How do you help show that Google is using your product, and how do you connect people to people at Google without violating GDPR or like other massive privacy concerns?
So we address these privacy concerns by not actually holding on to any personally identifiable information. So when someone pulls a container through Scarf, we do look up metadata associated with the IP address, which can tell us like, oh, this was from a company, or this happened from this cloud provider, et cetera, which we then expose to the maintainers. But then we just delete the actual IP address. So like, we can't tell you Justin went and downloaded this. Here's Justin's email. That's not something that we can do. That's not something that that's not something that we're trying to do. But just knowing that someone from the company downloading is useful. And I think the way that we phrase this is that Scarf's trying to track companies. We're not trying to track people. And in a world where it's usually the other way around, I just love that that's something that we can do, that we can kind of just track companies on behalf of people and organizations and open source.
But you're not providing as much value then, because the people at the companies is the people you want to reach. I don't want to reach Google's letterhead. I want to reach John Schmidt or something. I don't know, Eric Schmidt. I want his email so I can be like, please fund us.
Right. And there's plenty of services that help with that information. So given a company, there's lots of, third-party services that can say like, well, depending on the role that you're trying to reach, like here are the emails that we know. And those are on our roadmap to have those kinds of integrations with Scarf is planned. But that doesn't mean that from a privacy perspective, it does not mean that we're like actually kind of capturing that and then raw exposing, but merely that we help you identify downstream from that.
Is your stuff open source as well?
The gateway itself is not quite open source yet, although it needs to be, because, we're not really trying to lock in maintainers into doing anything. We're trying to, free them up. And so it is important that we do open source it, and that is planned. Other parts of the Scarf tool chain, bits and pieces are open source. We open source everything that we can. So we have like a JavaScript library that we've open sourced. We're in the long run working on package managers and components for package managers that will be open source. But right now, a lot of the value that Scarf provides is the infrastructure of what we've built, which is kind of less useful on itself to open source. But as we build out the feature set and that stuff stabilizes, it is very much on the roadmap for those components to be open sourced as well.
So if I'm a developer who is running a cloud native project, how easy is the setup process for me to start using Scarf?
It's pretty quick. So it's just make an account on our site. For the gateway, it's literally just tell us where the container is. tell us where you'd like it to be, and then you're done. You can optionally tell us what CNAME you'd like to use, and then you got to go to your DNS and actually set that CNAME up. By default, we give you a URL to use, but we encourage projects to connect their own domain because that way you're not even locked into using us. So that's really about it. I think that often when we talk to projects, like they can get set up in like 10 or 15 minutes and they're off to the races.
Yeah, it's something we're evaluating after we fix some other things that are more pressing. But we had a call with Avi, and that's how Avi got on this podcast. One thing I was looking at the Scarf Gateway, you do have some really good users. I mean, as I said, you have Linkerd, which is buoyant, and then Rocket.Chat, which I haven't heard from for a while, but I know they still have activity. Are they just using Docker things or?
Yeah, they're using the gateway right now. So I think that their main installation for Rocket.Chat, if you're hosting yourself, is just pull the container down and run it. And so, yeah, Rocket.Chat's been using it in that capacity as well. They have people from different parts of the organization that are all checking Scarf to just see that activity and use it however they want to make decisions. But that's a really exciting one. I think that I love when companies like that have a host it yourself option. And especially for something like chat, where like having it locked down in your own cloud is such a valuable thing for a lot of different domains. And so being able to actually empower those companies to actually understand their software usage, but in a way that doesn't actually sacrifice the privacy of the users is what keeps me getting up every day really excited about what we're doing.
That's pretty awesome. And you have like a new open source project.
Oh yeah, Nomia, yes.
The white paper was really impressive. I mean, it kind of went over my head, but still, like, you just by your VP of engineering, I believe, go into what it is and what the future of it is.
Yeah, Nomia is a longer term project that we are working on kind of alongside everything else that we're doing. We brought on Shay, who's now our VP of engineering, to work on it. And it's a project he's been kind of stewing on for over a decade. He's been a core maintainer of the Nix package manager. If you're not familiar, Nix is a purely functional package manager. And it takes a lot of kind of the cutting edge research from package management and makes it so that packages can be deterministic from their inputs. Like given a set of inputs that go into a package, you know that you're going to build the exact package output given the inputs. And so what Nomia does is it generalizes those ideas from Nix about the inputs here are all packages and here's how you build them. And here's what's a derivation for what a package is. What Nomia does is generalize those ideas so that you can really express much more arbitrary things at different levels of abstraction. So you could think of kind of the exact ways that one package might be a product of several inputs or dependencies. You can kind of take those same ideas and then extend it to spinning up cloud services of, here's all of the, my database and these different web services. I just kind of want to spin them all up. I want to have a developer environment with all of these packages implemented, and here's how those compose. And so Nomia is really this very generic engine for how you reference as resources, how you compose them, and how you can just spin up an environment, whatever that might mean, given those resources. And so in the long run, Nomia is something that we will be building our package management tools on top of and will be available for other people to build package managers and build systems, et cetera, service managers on top of. And so our goals for Nomia is that by offering a very generic framework and ecosystem around resource management, we can help maintainers with even more information about how their dependencies that they maintain and distribute are getting used, kind of regardless of how and where and from what registries, et cetera. So it's a very ambitious and long-term project, but it takes a lot of the very cool ideas that have come out of Nix and even things like Git use these like content addressable deterministic principles and apply them to very broad sets of domains.
And how did you find Shay? I mean, he seems like a unicorn.
So he actually came to us probably about a year ago and said, here's an open source project that I want to build. I've been, in the Nix community for a really long time. I want to generalize them with this project. Can Scarf help me monetize it and figure out how I can make a sustainable business out of Nomia? And the more we thought about it, the more we realized how much Shay's vision for Nomia overlapped with what we were trying to do of help people distribute their software and understand how it's being used and connect with their commercial users. The more it became clear that Shay should be building Nomia at Scarf and we should, kind of align and combine forces and kind of just put that forward and get it out there. And so we brought him on to build it for Scarf.
That's awesome. This reminds me of the mRNA pioneer, Dr. Carrico, I believe it is. And she had a really interesting, it's kind of similar to Shay's story, where she spent decades of her life working on mRNA, failing, not getting grants, took demotions just to continue the research. And they finally found the CEO of, I think it's the German company that hooked up with Pfizer on the newest vaccine. She was the lead on that. And I think this is kind of similar, where you have this passion of an engineer of 10 plus years of going into this. I think this could turn out to be like the mRNA story of the package ecosystem.
I really hope it does turn out that way. It's very early days for Nomia, like in terms of the scope of the ambitions of the project, really just getting started with it. But we've already had a lot of good interest from a lot of the Nix community. And as we kind of build this stuff forward and see how it takes shape, I'm really excited to see how it evolves. It's a very ambitious vision.
Reminds me a lot of GX, which was a package manager built by Jeremy Johnson at Protocol Labs, which uses Merkle trees to identify package managers. So or any packages that you have. So you can use the entire IPFS ecosystem basically to pull down packages.
Oh, neat. That's super cool. Yeah, I feel like
it's a cool project.
So many applications to this. Yeah. The content addressability story for package management generally is just a really good idea. And like Docker makes really heavy use of that with great success for how you can cache different layers, and because caching in the container space is so important.
Yeah, and expensive. I'm in the CDN business. I know how expensive that can get.
Yeah. I think it's one of the benefits of using a package manager that basically runs on top of IPFS, right? Because it's decentralized. So anyone who has that package makes it easier for other people to get it faster, including closer to you geographically. So it sort of just invalidates the whole CDN model right now. And also the cloud native model, where you end up with people going towards the major three companies. But instead, it's sort of just whoever's using a thing, we can use the thing too. So I'd be curious to watch Nomia evolve. I don't know if you'll be able to answer questions right now on what's different about it or so on. But that does lead me on to another question, which is, besides Nomia, what are you most excited about for Scarf in the future?
I mean, I think in the long run, what I'm really excited about for Scarf's future is how we can really help the businesses behind a lot of these cloud native projects and help them be more successful. So the tooling that we're going to be building out to help with those businesses, like things like support agreement facilitation and, selling of licenses and all sorts of commerce downstream from open source, I think is really going to just help the overall ecosystem in the long run to just be more sustainable. And this is what we got into on the Sustain podcast a lot. But yeah, I think what I want to say is just that the sustainability issues that face the open source community as a whole are equally crucial for the cloud native community as well. I think that open source powers the cloud native community, like just directly, all this stuff is open source all the way down. And whatever we do to help the businesses and people and projects in this space are just going to yield to better software for everybody up and down. And so by empowering both users and the people building this stuff, that's how we get a vibrant community.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, that was a great, I don't know where to go after that. That was just a perfect.
But I do have a very important question. And that question is, how is my friend Avi Hoffman doing? She doing good?
She's doing great. Yeah. She's been really helpful as we've been getting just kind of the Scarf community going. She's been kind of spearheading that charge for us and all of our content efforts and stuff. It's all her.
Yeah. I mean, you got some really great talent. Like you got Avi, you have Shay. I mean, you seem to have a knack for getting people that really get things done. That's pretty awesome. It's a good skill.
Yeah, I'm really proud of the team that we've put together already. And I think that the secret to that success is really not anything that I'm doing, but really just the problem we're working on and trying to solve these problems in open source of, how we share data with each other and how that can be a driving force for change and improvement in the open source and cloud native spaces is something that resonates with a lot of people. And I think this is just a hot topic in general of open source sustainability, and have better incentive structures to enable that is something that it just attracts a lot of good talent. And we're doing that by building awesome dev tools. And that's the other thing there too.
Yeah.
Building fun dev tools and helping people out, it's an easy sell.
Yeah, you got the JS SDK, I believe, and just I think that's what it comes down to is who has the best tooling, and the developers get attracted through there. Yeah, I think this is really great. Also, great documentation, which I saw you have good documentation as well. So, yeah,
that's an ongoing one to do.
Oh, it never stops.
It's
never done.
I think.
No.
Yeah, we've been putting more and more investment into it, and the farther we go, the more I think, wow, we have such a long way to go with docs. You can really never put enough effort into the docs. That's what Javi's been really helpful with as well. She's been is now just opening pull requests all the time, just improving docs across our various repos, and cannot put enough resources into that. And so I think one of the things that we do is trying to just help create a blueprint of how you have a commercially viable open source project. And I think a piece of that is just docs. Just keep going on the docs. If you think you put enough resources into it, just put a little bit more, probably is the way to go.
Are you all already cash positive?
No, I hope we get there soon. We're really focusing right now on the growth of our tooling. And so the monetization of that has not really been the focus right now, because the strategy here is that by building on a really good foundation of developer tools and software distribution tools and analytics, that puts us in a good position to actually start to help these projects monetize with their commercial users. But it's not what we've focused on so far. I mean, now we're kind of getting into a little bit of, more startup and business ideas. But I think at our size, we just really have to focus what we do rather than try to do a bunch of things all at once. And so right now, dev tools, let's make good dev tools. And so the gateway has been the main thing that we're putting our efforts behind. And, right now it's containers, but we'll be expanding it to just arbitrary kinds of packages behind it as well. So we can just broaden the reach and who we can help with it.
If you can describe your company in 5 words for your mission, I guess I'm trying to get at, what would it be? What's the North Star that all your team members are marching towards? I guess what I'm trying to say. And it doesn't need to be 5 words. I don't know. Talk about arbitrary is horrible.
We want to empower open source developers to have sustainable businesses and projects.
That resonates with me.
Yeah, that works.
And our approach, I think, is what makes us different. There's a lot of companies and a lot of efforts to try to, build more sustainable open source. Our approach is start with the distribution of that software, help the people who build that software understand how it's being used. And that's the wedge to how do we connect them to their commercial users? And it all starts with the data of the distribution layer.
You know what I just thought of? Do you know Patrick and Josh over at Orbit? Are you familiar with Orbit?
Yeah. I met Patrick a few months back. He's great. And I think they just raised more money too. So
they raised a 15 million A round. It's very awesome. I'm really proud of them. I think you guys could probably hook up. And have you already been in talks with that?
We talked about it very initially, like many months ago. Because I think that if you're looking at the health of your community, I think the missing piece of that is, well, who's actually using it, not just who. I mean, the contributions and stars, it's just like these are all pieces of the puzzle. And so the better view that we can give to these maintainers, the better off they'll be and the better off their users will be as a result.
Yeah. I mean, I use Orbit every single day. 5 days a week. And just looking at the dashboard, it would be amazing to see what stats Scarf is giving me, because they emphasize a lot on organizations and individuals that are using your project. So if this gives another data point, I think,
What are you doing to ensure that you're not myopically focused on helping developers only focus on what companies that they can get something out of? How are you making sure that the tools you build actually empower disempowered communities of developers, people of color, women? What are you doing to make sure that these users are also being cared for and are a priority in what you're doing?
I love that question. And I think what I'll say is that I see our mission as directly aiding that, because there's a whole group of people who would be working on open source more if it was sustainable for them to do so. Yeah. And so by building tools that help them actually jump into an open source project, you work on it full time because there's actually a living on the other side of it. That is directly what is going to help more underrepresented people get into more cloud native technologies, not just like, can you get a job at a company doing that? And so I think the more we empower sustainable open source, the more we are going to get in all kinds of people into open source.
So I really like that answer. And I would agree with you. One of my, I guess, questions, concerns, thoughts is you said that your approach is different. How are you ensuring that your approach isn't directed by the kind of thinking that led to the problem in the first place, which is people thinking that what they do will help out? Like, what are you doing to listen to other voices in how you develop these dev tools?
What I would point to is how much we've been listening to the feedback and community about our analytics strategies. It's no secret that analytics in open source has not been the norm thus far, and in a lot of contexts, extremely unpopular. And so with our initial analytics tools, the JavaScript library that we offer, Scarf.js even, we ran into a lot of pushback with some very big maintainers that were using Scarf. And the feedback that we had around that was a extreme distaste for a third-party hook, a phoning home in a context where you weren't otherwise. And we really dug in with them, with people who were like, thinking like, this is the worst thing that you could be doing. Why would you do this? And when we dug in and talked about it with them, came to a few conclusions and agreements, actually, which was that even people who really vehemently don't like that see why maintainers might need this information and how it can help them. I don't think that there's a lot of disagreement about that. It's more about like, okay, well, how are you actually collecting this information? It's also the case that the registries already have this data. Even right now, they just don't share it. So well, how do we bridge this gap? And so I think that's what I would point to, that not everything that we try is going to be popular or stick. And what we do is we just listen and we adapt. And that's how documentation insights came to be, which is interesting. I think people don't like a very transparent, the Scarf.js logs, where it's like, hey, Scarf.js is here. Here's the dependency that's using it. Here's what it's reporting. Here's how you can opt out. Here's another way you can opt out. People were not okay with it. Pixel tracking, on the other hand, something that I think is a lot more subversive and, opaque in a lot of ways. It's in line with people's expectations, and therefore they were okay with it. So we offer pixel tracking now. And I think what was a bigger learning of that is people are okay with the fact that registries have this information. So that's really one of the things that had us lean in on the Scarf gateway as much as we have, which is that this integrates with the registry. There's no additional phoning home that needs to happen. All that needs to be is that the registry and the people who actually distribute software through that registry need to be aligned and need to have incentives that are aligned. And so as a business, we align with the maintainers as much as we can, and we align with the people who use that software as much as we can. And the result is that actually this data is something that's useful and we're going to expose it.
Awesome. Good answer. How are you doing viral marketing? How are you making sure that it's not just Scarf, but actually having users go out and be like, okay, you should use Scarf? What resources are you providing to those users?
Yeah. One line of product features that we're kind of just getting started with right now is tools to help projects market themselves with their usage data. So we just launched dynamic Readme badges that can either show here's how many times this packages have been downloaded, but also here's how many commercial users are being identified each month. And the idea being that, a lot of projects have a logo wall on their Readme, and we think that, that's a really great approach and highly recommended if you have commercial users using your cloud native or open source project. And having kind of dynamic tools that help aid that is something that also markets Scarf as well. Here's all the great companies who use my project. Also, we got this data from Scarf, and other people come in and say, oh, actually, I want that information too. Why don't I have that? And then,
you just launched buttons recently, didn't you?
Yeah. The Readme Badges is what we just launched there. We'll have more tooling around this as well, just ways you can kind of dynamically market yourself and use Scarf data to power it.
Where can people find out about that tooling? Where can they read more about Scarf on the web?
So check us out online. We are at scarf.sh. We have a blog there to highly recommend everyone take a look at, and you can read more about our ideas on this topic and what we're building in the space. And we also have a newly launched Slack community where people can come and discuss both Scarf products, but also just as well open source and cloud native technologies as a whole, and how that fits into sustainability and just making your project successful.
Can I talk about drafts? I don't need to. I was just curious if I could talk about drafts.
You can always talk about giraffes.
Excellent. Okay, great.
I love it.
I believe, Avi, last name Press, that your website is still avi.press. Is that accurate?
That's my personal.
I said it once and I'll say it again. It's the best domain in the world.
Thank you. I'm glad you think so. Yeah. When I first saw that .press TLDs came out, I think I was in college at the time. I stopped what I was doing.
I hope you bought them for all of your family members as well. Just every single person.
Yeah. Sister,
I didn't, but I should.
Oh no!
Wait, no, I've been. I need
You're
to.
so selfish,
so
Avi.
I am, and my brother has a birthday coming up, and now I know what I'm getting him.
Excellent. Okay, good.
That's a great.
My website is, of course, richard.littower. No, it's not. Littower is not a TLD. But yeah.
Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be nice? Yeah.
Avi, this was great. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to us.
Yeah.
Any last message you want to leave with the listeners about Scarf?
I think my last message would be that if you distribute software to anyone on any technology, drop us a line, tell us how we can help, whether it's analytics, whether it's commercialization, whether it's just wanting to chat about open source. We are here and we want to talk. So yeah, drop us a line.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you guys.